Austrian painter, second-rate painter, third-rate painter. Aaron, I think there is a missing link in your narrative. I agree with everything you said. The missing link is capitalism. Because you see, if you combine a lot of capital goods, machinery, science, engineering, physics, you put it all together, you end up with a great deal of potential, which you described beautifully. A potential to do great things, to be a great country on the cusp of scientific revolutions, of production, and so on and so forth. But when those machines are owned by a tiny percentage of the population, and their accumulated profits hinge on the exploitation of the many, then that introduces the poison, which, let me put it very succinctly if I can, you end up being able to produce a lot more stuff than the majority of the people who are producing it in the factories can consume, because you have squeezed the living daylights out of them in order to have high profit rates and price cost margins for the very few. And then you have a dearth in demand. That's when Keynes comes in. So you have a slump. Then you have unemployment. That gives rise to discontent. Then some third-rate painter from Austria gets up on a soapbox and says, I know who the problem is. It's the Jew, or the Islamist, or, the foreigner, or the Irish. It doesn't matter, right? Somebody, the left-handed, the trans, the gay, whoever that can be identifiable and who can become the focal point of the discontent, which is as the result of the failure of capitalist labor and capital markets. Okay? And then you get a lot of strength from them and you say, I'm going to make you great again. I'm going to make you proud again. Just give me absolute authority and I will look after you, and I'm going to go and get the Jew, the Islamist, the Frenchman, the Greek, whatever, yeah? The British. And then you get a lot of power, and at the beginning, you can take this power like Hitler did, and you can throw a lot of money at industry to build up weaponry. And that creates employment. And then people love you because they were unemployed and now they are not unemployed anymore. And they feel really very proud because they see a lot of tanks rolling out of the production line. And they have parades. And you build an Olympic stadium and you stage the Olympics. And you have Riefenstahl creating beautiful film of the re-emergent, national, proud, species. And then at some point you invade Poland. But that, this is what happened in the 1930s in Germany. They are now attempting to do it again. When Trump says, make America great again. I mean, when was America great? Ever. It never was. I look at what impact Hitler had on the German nation. Yeah. Decimated the Germans. Yeah. Absolutely decimated the Germans. Every right-wing fascist, Nazi, proto-fascist regime, in the name of the motherland, does a lot of damage to the motherland. This is standard. I mean, look at Pinochet in Chile. Chile has not recovered from that experience, and I don't think. How
so? Somebody would say that Chile is the wealthiest country per capita in South America. Surely, that's because of Pinochet, even if he did disgusting, murderous things. Why has it not recovered?
Well, firstly, the majority of people are worse off today than they were 30 years ago. If you look at their capacity to educate their children, to house themselves, to put food on the table. GDP per capita is perhaps the most disconcerting and misleading measure of well-being. Let me put it, Aaron, in another way. I mean, you know it and we know it, but let's just make sure that everybody understands it. So if we're all in a pub and Mark Zuckerberg walks in, we are all, per capita terms, billionaires. All of us, billionaires, not millionaires. We're not. It's a joke. What happened was the copper mines, extremely lucrative copper mines, were privatized. And a tiny band of Chileans became extremely rich. And also, wages were crashed because of the policies of crashing trade unions. So profit rates, even for medium-sized businesses, went up. But the vast majority, 70%, 80% of the people in Chile are far worse off. And now politics is completely paralyzed. And you have congresses and presidents who, independently of their intentions, whether they're good or bad, sometimes they're not bad, they have decent intentions, they're simply paralyzed. They simply cannot govern Chile in a way that they move out of that downward spiral. Same with Greece today. So, but more generally speaking, you mentioned this idea of purifying the nation, getting rid of the riffraff, getting rid of the other, the brown, the Jew, the Muslim, the people who somehow sully the DNA of the nation. That's a standard Nazi-fascist trope. The idea is that our pure men and women would have done wonders in this country if they were not held behind by all these impurities that have infiltrated the body of the nation, and that if somehow we manage to purify the body of the nation, which will, unfortunately, they say, but they don't mean it, involve strengthening our defenses in order to keep our borders airtight, and that may involve the occasional war with the riffraff out there, the foreigners who are trying to undermine our sovereignty and so on. So this whole narrative may begin beautifully in terms of GDP, especially GDP per capita. If you have military Keynesianism, if you spend a lot of money on the police, on army, on armies, on weaponry, and so on. This is exactly what happened in the 1920s in Italy and 1930s in Germany. This is what the European Union is trying to do now with military Keynesianism, of embarking upon a spending spree on weaponry, which is also underpinned by Islamophobia, by the fear of the Chinese, of the Russian, of the African. Remember what the president of the European Council said, that Europe is like a beautiful garden, but it's surrounded by a jungle, and the jungle is trying to invade it, and we, the gardeners, must prune it, and we must stop it. This is the same narrative as that of the fascists and the Nazis of the 1920s and 30s, and we know where it ends up. Military Keynesianism does not work, unless you have one war after the other to keep the machine fed. At some point, either you're going to stop the wars and then the whole economic miracle is going to collapse, or you're going to be embroiled in a world war, in a genocide, in some regional conflict that in the end turns your own country into a wasteland. So in the name of purifying the nation is led down the garden path. Great.
I suppose, again, I suppose a skeptic of that would say...
When they had slaves?
No, they would just say...
When they had a civil war?
Before it deindustrialized. That's what they would say. Before we deindustrialized, that's what they would say.
That's when they had slaves.
No,
in the cotton fields.
Before...
Yeah, and they killed all the natives.
Before, but I'm just trying to...
when was that? When was the greatness of the United States realized?
I think that Trump's arguments that register the most, forget the cultural war stuff, forget Sydney Sweeney and adverts, like literally nobody cares about that stuff. The stuff that I think is agreed on by J.D. Vance all the way down to, a Trump voter in the Appalachian Mountains who, barely consumes news content. They agree on two things: illegal migration and deindustrialization. They agree on that. So, okay, park the illegal migration thing. I think when they say make the country great again, I do genuinely think they mean before deindustrialization, which we agree that's a natural feature of capitalist production.
Well, it's actually
profiteering.
Deindustrialization was a catastrophe for the American working class. There's no doubt about it. It could have to do with immigration. Nothing to do with immigration. I mean,
sure.
The United States is the result of migration. It doesn't matter whether it's illegal or legal. I mean, in my country, we had migration of half of Albania. It was all illegal in the 1990s, and it created a much better Greece as a result. I mean, my university students, most of them now are children of those Albanian migrants. Without them, we wouldn't have a university. They are the best students I've ever had. So, it doesn't, this illegal thing. Migration is part and parcel of the American story, where you're absolutely right, and where Trump is absolutely right, is that deindustrialization was a disaster for the majority of Americans. You go from coast to coast, and all you see is carnage. The word that he used in his inauguration speech in 2016, which was a horrible speech, but the word carnage did capture the result of deindustrialization. But why did deindustrialization happen? It didn't happen because of the Mexicans or because of the Nicaraguans or the Greeks migrating into America. It happened because Wall Street effectively took over after 1971, the end of Bretton Woods, and it started recycling the rest of the world's capitalist profits. So, once America stopped being a producer of surplus goods, and being an industrial superpower as it was in the 1950s and 60s, for a number of reasons. The Vietnam War, the internal dynamics of the American capitalist economy led America to start having a trade deficit. And it was the decision of Richard Nixon and the people who followed Richard Nixon, people like Paul Volcker, who was the president of the Federal Reserve and so on, and the people in the Republican Party that now their descendants are applauding Trump, who decided, okay, we have a deficit, we're not going to be German, we're not going to tighten our belts, we're not going to introduce austerity, we're not going to do a George Osborne. What we're going to do is we're going to step on the accelerator and increase our deficits and make the rest of the world pay for them. So the rest, the German, Japanese manufacturers were producing cars and electronics and so on, sending them to the United States. The United States would pay with dollars. Then the German and Japanese capitalists, and then the Chinese capitalists as well, would send those dollars back to Wall Street. And what would Wall Street do with that? It would buy American debt, so the American government could be in perpetual increasing deficits and wouldn't matter. They would buy shares in American companies that subcontracted their manufacturing to Vietnam, and real estate. Thus, Donald Trump was born as a result of this model, which deindustrialized. So this is the great hypocrisy of people like Donald Trump. He's looking the working class of the United States in the eye and says, "Oh, I feel your pain." But their pain is exactly this. It's the output of exactly the same process that led to Donald Trump's real estate business success, right? And in the end, of course, he's going to sell them down the line in the same way that Hitler led to the destruction of Germany. Because even if, let's say that Donald Trump's policy and J.D. Vance's policy of slapping tariffs on all the countries that export stuff to the United States works, and there is reindustrialization of America. I don't think there will be, but let's say there is. Then what happens immediately after that is that the flow of capital back to the United States stops, because the flow of capital into Wall Street from the rest of the world is the flip side of the same coin as the American trade deficit. Once you eliminate the trade deficit, there will be no more German profits, excess profits, or Japanese profits, or Chinese profits from the American market to go back to Wall Street. So who's going to suffer? Financiers in Wall Street and the realtors in New York. So Trump, even if he succeeds, he will have to choose between betraying his own class, the realtors and the financiers, or the working class of the United States. Make no mistake that he will betray the working class of the United States. Exactly the same way that every other ultra-rightist has betrayed the working class that it has appealed to for support in order to be authoritarian. Can I confess something?
Please.
One of my great sorrows is that Steve Bannon has said very good things about my previous book, Techno-Feudalism. When you have
He's always using the word, right?
Yeah, well, yes, and he quotes me. It is terrible when a fascist takes seriously your book, and especially when Marxists hated my book. Not all of them, but most of them. But anyway, let's not talk about that book. Look, there was an occasion. Steve Bannon and I were meant to debate one another in 2019, prior to the European Parliament election, because he was here in Europe, organizing the ultra-right. But then at the last moment, he pulled out. No, I don't talk to these people. I would talk to them. I don't have a deep platforming agenda. I don't think they're really interested deeply in ideas and historically grounded analysis of what's going on. Steve Bannon is a very good propagandist from the fascistic American right-wing perspective. he would agree with a lot of what I said, that, and he uses the concept of techno-feudalism in order to attack people like Elon Musk and to say that it's people like Elon Musk who are leading Trump astray. So the MAGA movement is in grave danger of failing because people like Elon Musk are not allowing Trump to do that which his heart really wants to do, which is to reindustrialize America and so on and so forth. And then immediately he turns his ire, his venom against the migrants. Because like a true fascist, he needs to blame it on the other, on the foreigner. He has no concept of capitalism. He's got no concept of the fact that as long as capital is owned by the very few, then whatever you do, there is going to be a tendency of the system, a systemic tendency for either an imbalance which creates large deficits that then require the exploitation of other nations in order to be covered, or large surpluses like the German economy or the Chinese economy produce, which then also require, in order to be balanced out, the exploitation of other markets. So in a sense, when Marx was arguing that capitalism has spawned a new form of imperialism, which is not the imperialism of, we want to conquer South America and not steal their gold, like old-fashioned imperialism, but it is the kind of imperialism where, because capitalism produces from the same production line not only amazing goods, like iPhones and gadgets and so on, but also dearth of demand. Dearth of demand is one of the safest products of capitalism. And in order to cover for that, to plug that gap in demand, you need to conquer markets and exploit those markets. And that is neo-imperialism, or the imperialism of the 20th century. And now we have new forms of imperialism through the new forms of capital that we have, like algorithmic capital or cloud capital. But you see people that, like Steve Bannon, they are propagandists. They don't care about the true workings of the machinery of capital accumulation. They just want power. This will to power, this Nietzschean, pseudo-Nietzschean, fascistic need to gather power and do things with it, create facts on the ground and be men and put the women back at home and, get rid of trans people and blame it all on the browner segments of the human race and pretend that there is no climate change. Because, if you accept that there is a climate catastrophe or emergency, then you have to be communist. Because, the atmosphere is a commons. It's the definition of a commons. And the moment you privatize it, you kill it. They need to invoke satanic forces. They need to do that. But you said something before that I don't agree with, Aaron.
Please.
You said that the smart rightists who are approaching the question of the climate emergency are the ones who are accepting that there is climate change, but they reject the notion that there's causality between fossil fuels being burnt, for instance, primarily, and climate change. I don't think they're the smartest. I think these people can be easily disproved. The causal link has been statistically established, and you really need to simply not care about the science of statistics in order to dispute it. The clever rightists are the ones who agree that it is fossil fuels, it is the agriculture, that the way we do it, that causes climate emergency, but insist in a kind of evangelical way that the market that caused this problem is the mechanism, the divine mechanism, the invisible hand by Adam Smith. He used that term in order to invoke the hand of God, right? So, and what is the hand of God? The forces of demand and supply that must be harnessed in a neoliberal way by creating new markets that didn't exist. Markets for emissions, trading schemes and all that, in order to defeat the climate emergency in the most efficient way humanity has ever discovered, and that is, what is the most efficient mechanism? It is the market. So this is the neoliberal mantra that is coming back to suggest that, okay, the markets failed, they're destroying the planet, now we have to create new markets that will save the planet.
But that's not a rightist position. That's like a centre-left position.
Well,
so when I say rightist, I mean kind of neo-reactionary.
I don't make a distinction.
That's like the PASOK Labour position.
Yeah, okay, but for me, these people are, they are expressing the interests of capital in a more lethal manner. Keir Starmer. Okay, let's go to Keir Starmer. I don't think he even deserves us mentioning his name. But Tony Blair was the worst Tory prime minister Britain ever had.
Was he? Did he do more damage to this country than Margaret Thatcher?
Well, he completed her damage. He was essential in completing the damage that Margaret Thatcher made. Because you see, Thatcher privatized externally, wholesale privatization. She took the housing stock from council houses. 30% of houses were, when I moved to England in 1978, I remember 30% were council houses. So she essentially enriched those lucky enough to be allowed to buy those houses. I'm sure they loved it, and they had every reason to, but the result was the complete catastrophe that now young people and not so young people experience in the housing market is the result of that. She took British Gas. She had Price Coopers value it, and she sold it at half the evaluation, half of its market value. You are too young to remember. The ads were amazing by Saatchi and Saatchi. Tell Sid, in other words, tell Sid that to become a spiv, that if you buy £1,000 worth of British Gas shares, then you can sell them tomorrow morning for 2,000. Why? Because the company was valued at half its actual market value. Okay, and people felt fantastic because suddenly, they could. I remember people were coming to me and say, "Look, will you use your quota to buy British Gas shares?" I remember I used to live in Norwich back then, and I said no because I wasn't going to participate in this racket. And they said, "Oh well, can you allow us to buy your share? And I will give you £500. We'll give you half the profits."
Secondary markets.
Yes, indeed, and it was happening all the time. And so that's how the spivs became Thatcherites. And that's how the Sierra man became shifted from the Labour Party to the Tory Party. It was a great success story, but that effectively depleted massive amounts of publicly owned capital and essentially threw it into the mill of the financialization that the City of London was creating, and that was all wasted, including North Sea oil. All the processes were used in order effectively to fight a class war against the working class, with a miners' strike, with all that. And then Blair comes on. When Blair became prime minister, effectively everything had been solved already. So he does something more insidious than Thatcher. He takes the National Health Service, for instance, or the public school system, and starts, without formally privatizing them, the NHS remained public, but he starts an incipient internal privatization of all its functions, of its services, the subcontracting, the private-public initiatives. That was all doing what, essentially? Increasing the cost of running the NHS massively, adding new layers of managers, on behalf of private companies that had taken over the NHS, except the shell of the NHS, which remained public. He did the same thing with schools, the quasi-private academies, and so on. I'm sure that some of those schools are better as a result, but they exclude the working class. If you're working class, you can't send your kids there. In the same way that the council houses were privatized, some working class people benefit, but in the end, there are no houses for the working class, council houses for the working class. And this was the Labour Party that did it. And now we have a new Labour government, a new Blairite Labour government that is taking this further down the same road of turning what is left of public institutions in this country into empty shells where there is a cesspool of financialization within that increases the costs at taxpayers' expenses and reduces quality, reduces quantity, and eliminates the sense that the British people have that they're actually in control, or their state even is in control of the social economy of this country. So talking about Labour or PASOK in my country as left, center-left, no. They are the worst part of the machinery of financialization and of turning our societies into neoliberal nightmares. Set of rules. It is the constraints that you can't take, a pawn and do whatever you want with it. There are certain rules, what you do with each of the pieces on the chessboard. Those constraints create a whole universe of chess, which liberate the mind. So constraints liberate. The question is, who chooses the constraints? Are these constraints placed upon you by somebody who has exorbitant power and can make you do things for them without you being an agent? So being a socialist is not being against rules.
Or quite.
Being a socialist is all about the collective decision-making process leading to rules that make for a good life and a universe like chess which liberates the mind.
Which takes us to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. One might even argue the Chinese Communist Party.
Indeed.
I mean, this idea that freedom is acting without any inhibitions whatsoever is, it goes to John Locke, it goes to Hobbes, and it's the heart of, I think, some of the ultra-liberal problems we're facing today. I mean, we're not having a conversation about the history of ideas, but I think that's a beautiful analogy from Wittgenstein. I didn't know that, about constraints. Freedom is impossible without constraints.
Indeed.
Hegel talks about it like...
Indeed, but if you think about the mindset of economists, the people who run the Treasury here in Britain, the people who run the Bank of England, they have a model of homo economicus. At the heart of all those models that forecast, inflation, unemployment, this, that, and the other, the stock exchange, growth rates, all that, right? At the heart, they have a model of homo economicus, the rational economic man, and it is a man. Because if you read the model, it can't be a woman. It's so stupid; it cannot possibly be female. It's a humanoid who loves what he does and does what he loves, and the only thing he cares about is to maximize his satisfaction given his constraints. So his constraints are the only impediment to his freedom. So he cannot understand the point you made and the point that Wittgenstein made, that constraints liberate, because he's too dumb to have a capacity to judge his objectives, his preferences, his passions. For me, and I think that that is the case for the ancient Greek Enlightenment and also for the French Enlightenment, not so much the Scottish Enlightenment. That's where I part ways, but that's why I think that the Anglo-Celtic philosophical tradition, even though it's very interesting and noteworthy, it has led us down towards the path that eventuated in neoliberalism. The original Enlightenment, the continental Enlightenment, is all about rationality as a mechanism by which we can ask ourselves the difficult question, which is, okay, I want X. Should I want X? To judge our preferences, to judge our passions. That's what differentiates us from machines or from stupid, insects. All animals want something. They have a desire for something. But we are the only animal that have a capacity to ask the question, okay, I want X. Should I want X? And by what criteria should I judge whether I want X? And as a society, we want that. Do we want that? Have we found out ways of synthesizing our individual desires into a collective will? These are the big questions which the right never answers. They assume that there is such a thing as a national interest which coincides with the interests of the rich, of the powerful, of the capitalists. And this is where we leftists have to come in and to deconstruct it. Well, to begin with, it was a time of war. I didn't expect to have a European war north of my home in the Ukraine. It was a time when a genocide was brewing. These were things that I didn't expect to have to live through again in my 60s. In addition to that, our political party that entered parliament in 2019, you have this experience here, a new left-wing progressive force trying to get ahead. We managed to get into parliament. We elected 9 members of parliament. Into 2023, we had high hopes in the end because of high levels of abstention amongst the young who liked us but didn't go to vote. We crashed out of parliament. We lost our seats. And it was a twin election because there was a hung parliament. And so a month later, we had a second one. And of course, the media had a ball vilifying us and demonizing us because the media belonged to the oligarchs.